Hey, what is going on, guys? Today we're talking subwoofers. We've got the HSU Research VTF-TN1 15-inch subwoofer, 600 watt amp. We're going to be talking about that here in today's video. Now, I love subwoofers. To me, subwoofers are what bring the impact to your movie. When you're watching a movie, if you've got a weak subwoofer, if you got a subwoofer that you can't feel that bass in your chest and in your body, you're really missing out. So we're going to be talking about the TN1. This overall is a phenomenal subwoofer. So it runs about $1,200 plus shipping. I think shipping's about $100. What you get in this subwoofer is a true value. Now, a lot of times we talk about value, or we say something is good for the price point. That's the case with this, but not the negative side of it. Usually we say that because a product is okay, but the low cost makes it seem a little better than what it is, if that makes sense. In this case, you get a great subwoofer, great price, and I believe that's really what HSU Research is about, providing those quality products without breaking the bank. So let's go ahead and dive into it. I'm going to talk about different aspects of the subwoofer. We'll talk about the style, the look. They've changed form factor on this from the previous model that it replaced, and I did a review on that here on the channel as well. So we'll talk about that. I'll share with you some things that I like about the subwoofer, a few little interesting things about it that I found along the way, and we'll also dive into the computer and take a look at some measurements as well. So first off, let's talk about the aesthetics. So this is a really just sleek looking subwoofer. Got some rounded corners, just a beautiful satin black finish, super soft, just looks really, really clean. Now what HSU did with this one is they kind of changed the form factor. The previous subwoofer was a little bit shorter, a little bit deeper. That was the VTF-15H Mark II. I got it right. That subwoofer is a little bit deeper, a little bit shorter, and you'll notice with the TN1, now we're a little bit less deep, but it got taller. Now, the team at HSU Research say that, you know, ideally you could put a pair of, let's say, bookshelf speakers on top of these and kind of like use that as your speaker stand. Honestly, I'm not sure I would ever do that. I would probably recommend just putting the subwoofers maybe in your corners, get some speaker stands, but that's just me personally. I think it would probably put the bookshelf speakers maybe a little bit higher than what I would want as my front speakers if I was running bookshelf speakers. But I absolutely love the style. As far as the look, the form factor may not be a good fit for everybody. Again, it's just a little bit taller, but the great thing about taller is most of us, we're limited with maybe the width, maybe we're limited in the depth in our room, but almost all of us, we're not really limited in the height, as long as it's not like an eyesore, as long as you don't look at it and go, it just looks kind of weird in my room. I don't think it's too tall, even for a living room setup. And in fact, I actually had it here in the theater room. It was sitting over here, that's about 6 foot from me. Listened to it there using Kaleidescape, hooked up to my JTR speakers, turned off those subwoofers, and I was just running the one TN1. And we'll talk about my impressions in a minute on that. And then I even had it in my living room, which is a much more open space, open floor plan, a lot more cubic volume to try to fill. So it's really, really difficult. You're not going to pressurize my living room. But the good thing is I was even getting some tactile response in my couch, in my body, from about, I don't know, it's probably about 14 foot away where it was based on my main listening position. So we'll talk about that in just a minute, but going back to the aesthetics, a couple things I really like about it. The bottom feet are almost like isolated feet, like isolation feet. And so if you put your hand on top of the subwoofer, you'll feel it kind of shake a little bit. And so those are those feet that are providing that isolation so that you don't get that transfer as much into your room but that's just a good thing, so you don't have to spend extra money on like ISO acoustics or maybe the SVS feet that you screw into the bottom. So that's a nice touch in itself. Simple grill. The grill is not magnetic. It's got pegs. One thing that was pretty interesting, so in the theater room, I would crank it up and I was just enjoying some movies, and I happened to look over right as I kind of, I'd gone through like 1 or 2 demos, and I looked over at the subwoofer, and all of a sudden the speaker grill just kind of went bloop and hit the floor. I'm like, well, that was interesting. So maybe I didn't put it on tight enough. So I put it back on, went through a couple other demos. I'm looking over there, and sure enough, it pops off again. So
setting time to target, 2 minutes, 15 seconds.
2:15, that's impossible.
So here's a close-up during that exact scene of the amount of excursion this woofer is doing. This is absolutely incredible. This whole room was just pulsing with bass. I could feel it in my chest. I could feel it in my seat. And when that grill came flying off the very first time, it literally flew across the room. I thought maybe I had not put it on tight enough, but after doing that 2 or 3 times, it definitely can continue to come off depending on how hard you're driving this subwoofer. I don't know if there's a little, some tolerance differences there. What I did notice though is if you take a close look at that speaker grill, you can see the fabric on it literally moving back and forth. I don't know if the surround is pushing that physically, or if it's just the pressure inside, you know, between the speaker or the woofer and the speaker grill. So either way though, it's putting a lot of pressure. And I can tell you, when we're talking about excursion, these subwoofers have some pretty awesome excursion. That woofer is moving a lot. If you're wanting to feel the bass in a room, either you have to have massive drivers, like in my case, I've got dual 18s, 4 of those, you know, 4 18s total, 2 dual. You either have to have large subwoofers, 24-inch subwoofers, to really get a lot of air moving, or you can have a smaller driver like a 15 or a 12, but in order to really pressurize the room and really have a lot of output, that has to have a lot of X-Max. It has to have a lot of movement in and out to be able to pressurize that room. And the great thing, this did a really good job with that. Looking at the rear, I know I covered this a little bit in the unboxing, but I'll just kind of quickly go over it. On the rear, on the plate amp, I believe it's a 600 watt Class AB amplifier. The cool thing with this, and we'll look at the measurements later on, what does that actually do? There are toggle switches. So there's an EQ1 and there's an EQ2 toggle switch. And then on the bottom of the port, or bottom of the subwoofer, you have 2 ports. And so the great thing with this subwoofer, offers a lot of flexibility depending on your room, depending on even your preference. Some of us are chasing low-end extension. We want our subwoofer to go as low as it possibly can. Honestly, that's me. I love sub 20 hertz. I love single digits when a subwoofer is able to do that. Now, this subwoofer isn't going to reach single digits, but it will definitely go below 20 hertz. And like I said, we'll take a look at the actual measurements here in just a little bit. But the great thing with that toggle switch and with the ports is you can run this subwoofer sealed and use EQ1 or EQ2 depending on what you're going after. You can also use one ported, basically leave one port plugged in. So one port is removed, one port is still plugged. And then you can toggle on and off, or I'm sorry, toggle to EQ1, EQ2. So there's like 5 different ways that you can modify the subwoofer to help to change the way it performs in your room. Again, depending on your room, your setup, but also on your preference. And we'll dive into the measurements in just a little bit. So let's see, what else can I tell you about the subwoofer? One thing I did notice, the power cable, not a big deal, but power cables, I mean, it just seems kind of small, flat, maybe on the cheaper side, than some of the subwoofer cables that I've gotten from other manufacturers. And honestly, I can't remember. I'd have to go back to the video on the previous model if it had the same type. Again, not a big deal, but it's something that I noticed. Aesthetic-wise, like I said, I think it's just a clean, you know, nothing fancy. You don't have any kind of custom wood finish, but it's just a very clean black satin finish. All right, so we've covered aesthetics. Now let's talk a little bit about performance. So again, like I mentioned, I had the subwoofer set up in my room, sitting over here. In my room, about the best frequency response I get is right over here, and I've measured this room all over. I don't get a great measurement with just a single subwoofer as far as flat frequency response, because I have room modes in my room, so you'll have some dips in the frequency response. But I placed it in the best spot over here and fired up Kaleidescape, went through my normal script. So I've got a demo script that I've just continually now going through. Anytime I review something, anytime I'm testing a product, I want to use that kind of same script. That way I have a kind of like a baseline. Like this, I'm used to hearing these specific scenes, and I know what to listen for. And so the great thing, sometimes with a ported subwoofer, you know, you'll experience some chuffing. And I even mentioned on the previous subwoofer, I heard some chuffing on the 15H Mark II. Wasn't horrible. I didn't notice it at my listening position, but if you got kind of close to it, you could hear the chuffing. So chuffing is when kind of like there's too much air trying to escape the tube, the port, and the air can't flow fast enough, and so it kind of just makes this chopping sound. I never heard that with the TN1, so that's great. To me, that's an improvement that they've made over the previous model. So I never heard any kind of chuffing, never heard it bottom out, and I cranked it pretty loud. And but this is providing in my theater room some really tactile bass. Like I was feeling it in my body. I would go through movies like Dune on Kaleidescape. I love Dune. Dune's got a lot of bottom end, and I know that that'll really test a subwoofer's capability because it's playing some pretty low frequencies, and there's just a lot of LFE in that. If you don't have Dune, pick it up on Blu-ray, 4K, whatever you're, just don't buy it on streaming. Not a big fan of streaming, but get it on Kaleidescape, get it on, you know, physical disc, something like that. But Dune is an amazing, amazing, just demo quality. Now, truthfully, I haven't watched the whole movie yet because I always go to the same demos, but the one that I use is Saving the Miners. It is just a really, really powerful scene. The part where they're up in the air and they take this nose dive straight to the ground, get real low to the ground. There's just this deep rumble, and the TN1 just handled that beautifully. Just really, really nice, smooth bass response, but very tactile as well. A couple other scenes in that particular movie when the big, what I call the crawler, when the big machine comes to a stop, there's this deep thud, low end extension. Again, just another part of that scene that just really stands out with the TN1. Then later on, there's a scene, one thing I did notice is, so this subwoofer I'm used to in my room, like I said, I've got some JTR, really big dual 18s. So there's 4 of those, and my subwoofers, they'll reach 10 hertz measured, and in a room you're going to get some boundary gain. So mine are actually have been measured down to about 5 hertz in my room. So I know that there's some information way down low. So when the kid drops to his knees, there's just this ooh, and it just starts up here, and then the frequency just begins to drop. And so there's a couple of little parts down, like the very low end of that, it kind of drops off. And that's just because these don't dig as deep as what I'm used to experiencing. But again, it didn't bottom out. It was just a nice smooth roll off on the bottom. But really, really, really cool scene. So I love Dune. Went through, you know, several other demos on that. A new one that I've added to my Kaleidescape script is from Furiosa. So it's like the second version of Mad Max, or second part. There's a scene in that one called The Ambush, and a couple of spots that really stood out with a TN1, and that's especially when the tower falls and hits the ground. Okay, that's just a big thud, just this real deep, real thick type of low end extension. And again, the TN1 just delivered. And again, I tried that in here in my theater room. Also tried it I tested it in my living room. Again, that's really open floor plan, open space, opens up to the kitchen, opens up to my dining room. I've got 12-foot ceilings in there. I've got 10 foot in here. And so I got a lot more tactile response here because it's a smaller room and I'm closer to the subwoofer. But in my living room, I still was able to feel it. It wasn't near as much, but again, I'm 14 foot versus 6 foot, and the room is just massive. So in something like that, I would highly recommend picking up 2 subwoofers, maybe even 4 if you can accommodate it for a really big room, small theater room like this. I always recommend duals no matter what you do. You're going to get a better frequency response, and plus you'll have more output, so you don't have to run your subs as hard, and they're just going to play cleaner. So that was just a great demo there. Furiosa, a couple other parts in that scene. Even when she was driving the car and she stops all of a sudden, and the engine's just rumbling. It's not overwhelming, but it was just really clean. That's one thing I noticed about the subwoofer. It's just really clean bass that it produces. But then when you got those big bombastic, those really big just moments in the movie, and the subwoofer needs to deliver, the TN1 delivers. Again, just lots of excursion, just pretty wild that a subwoofer in the $1,200 range can have that type of output and that type of impact with just a single 15-inch woofer. So I just think there's a huge value there. Now, the only negative that I've seen with the subwoofer, again, number one was the speaker grill. It kind of popped off. Again, I don't know if that's common, if that maybe there's some tolerances on those speaker pegs. I'm a fan of magnets. I like speaker grills that have magnets on them. That's just my own personal preference over speaker pegs. But that was just something that I noticed with that. The only other thing is the cabinet itself. So I can't hear resonances with a cabinet, but one thing I did notice is this subwoofer is pretty light. I was able to pick it up myself. I literally moved it by myself from my theater room to the living room. I just, picked it up, carried it. It's about 60 pounds. But when you tap on the side, it does sound a bit hollow. Just basically meaning that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of internal bracing. Now, I didn't take the woofer off to see and verify that, but again, just tapping on it just has a little bit of a hollow sound. Again, I don't know the actual impact on what we experience in our room and how that could possibly change if it was more braced even more internally. But again, just something that I noticed in that. So now let's jump over to REW on my laptop, Room EQ Wizard. I'll show you some measurements of the TN1 and we'll see how it performed. All right, so the first measurement I want to show you is just something kind of cool that I happened to see, and I think this is just a good teaching moment for those of you that may not know this, and many of you probably do, but just in case you don't, that's okay. So here is the first measurement. So this is a frequency response in my room. You can see down here it says theater room. And so this is the frequency response with that subwoofer placed over here to my left. Then I took that same subwoofer, went into my living room, took a frequency response there, and notice the difference. I'm just showing you this because I want you to realize how important your room plays in how well a speaker or a subwoofer will perform. And so here you can see this line, this green line, is actually much smoother. So if you can imagine a line being right here, kind of in the middle, going all the way here, that's pretty flat, and then it starts dropping off here. This is kind of more, in my theater room, it's more up and down. It's like a dang roller coaster. And so this isn't, of course, ideal, but that is how it measured in my room, but I just wanted to show you that just as a visual, that your room plays a huge role in how, like what kind of frequency response you get. And for those of you that don't know, just real quick, the way this works is, let's just turn this one off. So you can see this line right here, the left vertical is measured in decibels. That's how loud. The bottom is in frequency. So you can see we started a measurement at 15 hertz and it took a measurement all the way up to 80 hertz. And it says, okay, at each one of those frequencies, at 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, all the way up to 80, how loud was it? And then it plots this frequency response right here. So ideally, you want that to be pretty flat. Now, our ears hear subwoofers or like lower frequencies less sensitive than our higher frequencies. So a lot of times people will add what they call a house curve. So basically your bass would be higher here and your slope, ideally you want it to kind of go downhill this way because the higher frequencies we're more sensitive to those than bass frequencies. So if you were, let's say for instance, at 80 dB in this range up here and the higher frequencies, hearing that same 80 dB at a lower frequency like 20 hertz or 15 hertz doesn't sound near as loud, and so we tend to boost those lower frequencies. But I just wanted you to see that your room plays a huge role in that frequency response. And now let's take a look at the next set of measurements. All right, so this set of measurements will show us how the subwoofer differs in frequency response depending on how many ports you have open and whether you're using EQ1 or EQ2. So we'll turn on the first one. Here you can see this is all the ports are open and we're using EQ2. If I click on this, this is ported max output mode. This is what they're referring to it. So we've got all the ports are open. We're using EQ2, and you can see the lower frequency. This is a lot of times what I'm most interested in. I want to see how low do these do the subwoofers go. So here you can see at about, let's say 21 hertz, 21.5 hertz, that's when that slope starts going down. So we start losing output pretty quickly here. And really you're only going to be looking at about 3 decibels of drop. Once it drops about 3 decibels, that's really where we like to be. And so you could see right here, this is going to have a pretty decent response. This this line right here, this would kind of be the average there. And then that would slope down like if you were to add a house curve. But basically we're going to start losing output at about 20, pretty close to 20 hertz, and then it's just going to start dropping off from there. So that's with all the ports open, EQ2, and that's what they refer to as max output. And this will make more sense when we show you the other ones. So let's turn on the next one. The next one is one port is open, and then we're going to use the EQ1. So this is what we refer to, or what they refer to as ported with max extension. So that makes total sense. So here you can see this green line extends much deeper than this one. This one has a really steep roll off, and so we're losing output the lower in the frequencies, but you can see this right here extends out much further. So that's max extension. If you're looking for more bottom end, those lower frequencies, you'd want to maybe use this setting. One port open and then EQ1. Now the trade-off, you can see here with the first one, this was max output. We've got, let's see, that would be, it's only about 3 or 4 decibels more volume in, let's say, around 24 hertz, pretty much all the way down the frequency response. And so if you want a little bit more volume, you might want to do this max output. But if you want lower end extension with a little less output, then you would select the ported max extension, which that would be one port open and EQ1. All right, let's keep going with this. So here's the third one. This one is called ported max headroom mode. And pretty much, I mean, if you think of headroom, basically they are lowering this right here, I guess, to give you more headroom. Now, honestly, I'm not sure where that would be viable. And maybe you guys can help me out in the comments when you would want to use that. But to me, I just see that that's got a lot lower output in these lower frequencies. So that probably wouldn't be my preference. So we'll keep going. So here's another one. So this one is, now we're getting into the sealed mode. So we have 3 ported modes. You've got the max output mode, you've got the max extension mode, and then we have the max headroom mode. And then the 2 sealed options is sealed with EQ1 and sealed with EQ2. So first thing we notice is with sealed, we have the least amount of output. That's this orange line right here. So we're going to have less overall output in the room, but it still has pretty good extension here. But as we can see, this green line up here, it actually has more extension. So again, you got to kind of look and see what you're after. And so then this lower line here, this one is sealed EQ2, and that just drops even more. So just to make it a little bit more clear. All right, so right now we only have the 2 sealed modes. So you've got sealed with EQ1, that's that top. So again, you got more output here. Sealed with EQ2, you can see that line drops a lot further down here in these lower frequencies. So if I were running sealed, if you like that sound, because there is a difference in a sealed and a ported sound, but if you like a sealed, my preference would be this sealed with EQ1. If you're wanting to go with ported, my vote, and this is just what I would prefer in my room, I like that lower extension, so I would prefer to have 1 port open and using EQ1. All right, the last set of measurements I want to look at are compression testing. So basically what I've done is I've measured a frequency response in my room using REW. Then I increase the volume on the Marantz Cinema 30, 3 decibels. And as you can see here, this line is exactly 3 dB above the one below it. So we want to keep increasing the volume until that line no longer is consistent. So I continue up the volume, increasing, increasing, increasing. And at some point, which is right here, at this point, I reached the max volume on the Marantz Cinema 30, and I was only at +1, and the scale goes to +18. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Finally reached out to one of my patrons. I said, hey, any idea what this could possibly be? He recommended making sure that dynamic EQ was turned off in Odyssey, and it was, or I did turn that off, but that didn't fix it. And then he recommended turning off Odyssey, period. So taking off the room correction. And when I did that, then I was able to increase the volume. But the reason why I share that is because now you're going to see the frequency response completely change. So right here. So what I'm going to do, because I know this looks kind of crazy messy, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck these, because basically we have not hit compression yet. And so we've continued to go up and up and up, and you'll see that right here. So this is without Odyssey. Typically you'll get compression, or when we do hit compression, it's going to be on this lower frequencies right here. And you can see this is very consistent, same equal distance all the way through. When you get down here in this null, you can see it gets closer, but that's not compression. It's mostly always down here. When I got to this point, I ran out of headroom in REW. And basically what happens is the volume was so loud in the room that the actual microphone, the UMic 2 that I used to measure, basically began to clip. It was overloading that microphone. And so this was a limitation of the microphone. So this was as loud as I was able to get using that microphone. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a measurement from Audioholics. And so James Larson measured this exact subwoofer. And this, as I mentioned earlier in the video, this was taken on what they call a ground plane. So this is taken out on outside, and so you don't have the room interactions. As you can see on my graph here, we've got these hills and we've got these valleys way down here. Well, when you take that subwoofer outside of a room, you get the real frequency response without the room. What we're seeing here in this graph, this is my room changing that frequency. And so since I wasn't able to reach a max output of the subwoofer, I want to show you this graph and this chart from James Larson and Audioholics. So this shows you how loud this speaker was able to get. You can see right here, we've got some compression taking place at that top line. And so the line right before it is basically the max output for this subwoofer. And you can see that right here. Now, overall, I'm just super impressed, man. Again, I'm a big fan of what Shoe Research is doing. Just seems like Dr. Shoe knows what he's doing. Great, great, kind man, but he also is a great engineer and makes some really cool products, and they won't break the bank. I think this subwoofer can easily hang with some of the other subwoofers on the market that are costing $2,000 and even $25. Not 25, how about 2,500? I think the TN1 can easily compete with some of the other subwoofers that are on the market that are much more expensive. And so this is just a great, great bang for your buck. A lot of value in this, massive performance. Even Gene Delasala with Audioholics, when you look at his measurements, I know James Larson did an extensive measurements on like literally outside a room. So they did ground plane measurements where you take the room out of it. When you saw on my speaker frequency response in my room, you're gonna have some dips and you're gonna have some peaks. But when you look at it outside of a room on a ground plane, you notice it was really linear. And so it's just a really great, smooth, flat frequency response. And that's great for a subwoofer and even a speaker. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll post a link down in the description below to the TN1 over on the Shoe Research website. Definitely check them out. If it's a good fit for you, I think it's definitely worth your money. I hope you guys have an incredible week. God bless. We will catch you in the next video.